Graders, in our last lesson together, we talked about comparing fractions that have the same denominators, which is super duper easy. But today what we're going to talk about is comparing fractions that have the same numerators, which is not something we talk about very often when it comes to fractions. So let's look at that today. Our math focus is the following. I can compare and order unit fractions by using models and understanding of numerators and denominators. Now, a lot of this, just like comparing fractions that have the same denominators, is really just common sense. So we're going to look at a model of three different fractions that I made right here. So the first one that I'm going to look at right here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's got 5 different equal, supposedly, spaces, and there's 1 filled in, so it'd be 1/5. Our next fraction right here has got 1, 2, 3, 4 equal spaces, and 1 is filled in, so it's 1/4. And our last fraction right here has got 3 equal spaces, 1, 2, 3, and 1 is filled in, so it represents 1/3. So we've got the fractions 1/5, 1/4, and 1/3. Now, I want you to just think for a second, if we didn't even see these pictures, which fraction do you think is the biggest and which fraction do you think is the smallest? Now, a lot of third graders think to themselves, well, 1/5 has got to be the biggest because it's got the biggest denominator. And let's take a little bit of a look at the pictures to see if that's the case or not. So take a look at the pictures and the fractions and see which is the biggest fraction. And you want to really look at those pictures. You may have looked at the pictures and seen that the biggest piece of the fraction is probably 1/3. So largest, we're rating largest to smallest. Right here, I'm going to write this up here. Largest to smallest. You can see that 1/3 looks the biggest. Now you can see right here that the next largest fraction, would be 1/4. And then the next largest fraction after that would be 1/5 right there. So when we write our fractions largest to smallest, it's actually 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5, which is almost the opposite of what I had in my mind. So let's look at why this is so. So when you have a fraction like 1/3, you can see one of the 3 pieces. Those 3 pieces are actually quite large. And if we fill in one of those 3 pieces, it's certainly much larger than 1/4 and certainly much larger than 1/5. So think to yourself, maybe pause this video and think to yourself, what's the pattern we're seeing right here? If the largest to smallest fractions, they all have that same numerator. If it goes 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5, what's the pattern there? Well, hopefully you've thought about that and turned this video back on. And so you can see here, if we're saying 1/3, 1/4, and 1/5, the pattern would be that if they have the same numerators, the smallest denominator is actually the largest amount. So that would be, so if you have 1 out of 3 pieces shaded in, that's actually quite large compared to 1 out of 5 pieces shaded in. So you want to think about when you're trying to compare fractions with the same numerators, the same top numbers, you want to see the smallest denominator would always be the largest. The second smallest denominator would be the next largest. And actually the largest denominator would be the smallest amount. So it's not always what you think when it comes to fractions. Have a fantastic day, third graders.